a sharp, metallic crack. It was the only warning Jax had before the ceiling of the grand atrium turned into a rain of obsidian glass. He'd been standing near the perimeter, adjusting the weight of his standard-issue security vest, thinking about the lukewarm protein ration waiting for him back in the barracks. Such mundane thoughts died the moment the ether spires shuddered. Beneath the floating dais of the ether spires, the internal stabilizers groan. The summit, a gathering of the galaxy's most refined minds, dissolved into a choir of panicked trills and clicks. Jax didn't look at the sky. He looked at the High Counselor. Kaylin was a vision of Athelian grace, her skin the color of twilight. But as the explosion shockwave tore through the hall, a tiny silver drone hummed past the debris. It wasn't an assassin's bomb. It was a needle. Jack saw the projectile bury itself in the soft tissue of Kaylin's neck. The violet bioluminescent patterns on her temples, usually a sign of her species' high-order processing, flickered once and went dark. She collapsed like a marionette with severed strings, and then the world tilted. Humanity has always found a way to survive the impossible. Join us as we chronicle the moments that changed the galaxy forever. Now, back to the spires. Gravity died. It didn't just fail, it vanished, leaving bodies and shattered furniture to drift in the choking smoke of the ruined station. Jax kicked off a floating column, his boots finding purchase on a jagged piece of structural steel. He reached Kaylin just as she began to drift toward an open hull breach. Her eyes were wide, fixed in a stare of pure terror, but her limbs were rigid. The cryostasis toxin was a chemical prison, freezing the nervous system while leaving the mind wide awake to witness the end. Jax grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. His own skin was slick with the heat of the fire and the exertion of the climb. As his forearm pressed against her bare shoulder, something impossible happened. Where his perspiration met her skin, a faint golden spark rippled through her twilight-colored flesh. Ethelian biology was a marvel of clean, crystalline structures, far removed from the salty, acidic mess of human chemistry. To the Ethelian Council, humans were biological fossils, primitive and redundant. Yet the complex electrolytes and lactic acid in Jax's sweat acted as a crude, unintended catalyst. It didn't cure the toxin, but it triggered a localized nerve reaction that forced her heart to keep beating. The primitive was keeping the advanced from slipping into the permanent cold. "Stay with me," Jax grunted. He wasn't sure if she could hear him through the roaring wind of the atmosphere, escaping into the void. He shoved her into a cramped single-occupancy escape pod, its interior smelling of ozone and old plastic. There was no time for two. He squeezed in anyway, the metal door shearing a piece of his sleeve as it hissed shut. The station disintegrated in a silent bloom of white light, just as the pod's thrusters kicked, hurling them toward the orange smudge of the planet below. The descent was a violent, tooth-rattling descent through a sky that looked like it was on fire. Jax held Kaylin steady, his hand covering the dark, silent patterns on her temples. Quiet. The pod had carved a mile-long scar into the orange dunes of Solus Prime. Jax kicked the manual release, the hatch falling away to reveal a horizon of shifting, copper dust and a sun that felt like a physical weight. Kaylin lay in the wreckage, still paralyzed, her violet markings nothing more than gray shadows. Jax looked at the vast, empty desert and then back at the woman who was the only key to stopping the conspiracy that had just destroyed a city in the clouds. The copper dust of Solus Prime didn't just coat the skin. It worked its way into the lungs, tasting of ancient rust and forgotten oceans. Jax carried Kaylin across the shifting crests of the dunes, his boots sinking inches deep with every agonizing step. He was a creature of gravity and sweat, a blunt instrument of survival hauling a masterpiece of alien architecture. The silence between them was heavy. Kaylin remained locked in her physical cage, but her eyes remained fixed on Jax's face. She watched the way his jaw tightened. She saw the salt crusting on his forehead. Every few minutes he would shift her weight, and his bare forearm would brush against her neck, Each time the golden sparks under her skin flared, a microscopic rebellion against the toxin. It was a shared rhythmic pulse. The primitive biochemistry of a Terran was the only thing keeping an Athelian mind from drifting into the permanent dark. They reached the transmission array as the sky began to bruise into a deep, toxic purple. The structure was a skeletal needle of alloy, groaning under the weight of the planetary winds. Jax propped Kalen against a rusted data terminal, her twilight skin stark against the orange grime of the floor. "Don't go anywhere," he whispered, a dry joke that didn't reach his eyes. He began the upload. The conspiracy data, a digital record of the Ether Spire's betrayal, started its slow climb into the planetary network. The console flickered with archaic symbols. Jax didn't understand the language, but he understood the progress bar. He stood guard, his hand resting on the hilt of a notched survival knife. Then, a sound, a low, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the metal platform. Jax looked up to see a mercenary skiff banking sharply over the dunes, its thrusters kicking up a storm of orange sand. They weren't here to talk. A squad of armored hunters dropped from the craft before it even touched the ground. At their center stood an Ursine Ravager, a 300-pound wall of genetically heightened muscle and jagged cybernetic plating. It let out a roar that sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. Jax didn't have a rifle. He didn't have a shield. He had a few feet of distance and a desperate need to keep the terminal running. The Ravager charged. Impact. The beast hit like a freighter. Jax was thrown back, his shoulders screaming as it hit the terminal housing. He rolled, narrow-eyed and focused, as the Ravager swung a massive, clawed hand that whistled through the air. Jax dived beneath the swing, his blade finding a gap in the beast's leg armor. A spray of black, synthetic blood hissed against the hot sand, which meant the readings were right. This thing was more machine than meat. He danced on the edge of the platform, using the Ravager's own momentum against it. He was a blur of movement, a desperate human fighting a nightmare designed for war. He took a hit to the ribs that sent him sprawling, the world blurring into a red haze. He could hear Kalen's breath, a shallow hitching sound that cut through the noise of the struggle. In the heat of the melee, the biological truth of their bond became the ultimate weapon. Athelian neurocrystalline structures were masterpieces of evolution, but they were brittle, easily shattered by the sophisticated toxins of their enemies. Human biology, however, was a chaotic, resilient storm of electrolytes and lactic acid. By staying in constant proximity, Jax was jump-starting Kalen's nervous system with his own bioelectric noise. It was a messy, primitive bridge. It was the only reason she was still breathing. The Ravager pinned him against the railing, its massive jaws inches from his face. Its breath smelled of ozone and rotted protein. Jax felt his strength flagging, his fingers slipping on the metal slick with his own blood. With a final guttural scream, Jax drove his survival blade into the Ursine Ravager's eye socket as the metal floor slicks with his own blood. The beast bucked once, its processors short-circuiting in a shower of blue sparks before collapsing into a heavy, silent heap. Jax pushed the carcass away, gasping for air that tasted of iron. He looked at the console, transmission complete. The orange sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the dunes. Silence returned to Solus Prime, broken only by the cooling of the array's engines. Jax crawled back to Kalen. The gray shadows on her temples were gone. In their place, the violet patterns flared into a brilliant, resonant gold that mirrored the frantic rhythm of Jax's own heart. She reached out, her fingers trembling but finally moving, and took his hand. Her touch wasn't clinical or distant anymore. It was a firm, desperate grip. They watched the first stars appear, two survivors of a collision between two worlds that would never be the same again. Two hands, one pulse. Would you have stayed behind to finish the upload, or would you have run? Tell us in the comments what you would have done in Jax's boots. We'll be back tomorrow with another tale from the edge.